Hi there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The John Allen Show. I am John Allen, the editor of Crux, an independent online Catholic news source. You can find us on the web at www.cruxnow.com. That is cruxnow.com, your one-stop shopping destination for the very best in smart, wired, and independent Catholic journalism. I am also a proud fellow at the Word on Fire Institute of Bishop Robert Barron. They are the sponsors of this show, sort of the founders of the feast. You can find them on the web at wordonfire.institute. That is wordonfire.institute. You'll find the latest and greatest from Bishop Barron and much more beyond. Please do check it out. All right, we are doing something a little bit different this week. During the coronavirus lockdown, I have been coming to you from my home office in Rome, my cozy little cubbyhole in our Rome apartment, which has obviously been very convenient, and it's certainly made for a very easy commute to work. But it hasn't really been up to the high broadcast standards of excellence that we associate with Word on Fire. So this week we are trying to up our game. We are placing ourselves in the hands of our friends here in Rome at Longbeard. Longbeard is a digital marketing and design agency. They do all the IT work for the Crux site. They do projects for many other Catholic entities here in Rome and around the world. It's led by two of the smartest, most talented, and just best people you will ever meet, Matthew and Sheridan Sanders. Please check them out on the web. Longbeard, they are phenomenal, and so we're honored to be coming this week to you from the Longbeard Studios, which are in the shadow here in Rome of the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, St. Mary Major. It's the largest basilica in the world dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and it's home to the famous icon of Maria Salus Populi Romani, Maria, health of the Roman people. It's an image that sort of got Rome through the coronavirus, just as she has gotten Rome through plagues and pestilences, wars and famines and other crises of centuries past. She's sort of the backbone and the beating heart of the city of Rome. And so we are delighted to be here and to be able to entrust this broadcast to her. So Maria Salus Populi Romani, ora pro nobis. Okay, this week, as we always do, I'm going to give you a menu of three stories that are sort of percolating in and around the Vatican and the global church, and then we will unpack each, giving you the background and the context you need to think about what these stories mean. But first, let me set the table for you. Three stories. One, we had a towering reminder this week that while the coronavirus may be down, it is not out. That is, while it may be receding in some parts of the world, though by no means all, we have not gone back to normality as it existed before this pandemic. It came in the form of the Pope's annual celebration of the Feast of Sts. Peter and Paul. Now, that's a feast of the Universal Church, but it's especially important here in Rome because Peter and Paul are sort of the patron saints of the city of Rome. Peter, the symbol of the kind of the institutional leadership dimension of the church, Paul, the missionary and evangelizing dimension of the church, both believed to have been martyred here in Rome in the year 67. Now, normally, the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul here in Rome would mean a big production in the Vatican. It would mean a huge crowd in St. Peter's Square. It would mean a significant representation, ecumenical representation from the Patriarchate of Constantinople. That's been the case since the 1960s. It would also mean the annual Peter's Pence collection for the support of papal activities around the world. None of those things happened this year, and a reminder that while the Pope is still in business, it's not really business as usual. Second big story going on. There is a new chapter in the unfolding saga of the Vatican's latest financial scandal. If you've been following it, as we have here in the show, this is a scandal centering on the purchase of a piece of property in London at 60 Sloane Avenue. It's a former Harrods warehouse, originally slated for conversion into luxury apartments. In 2013, the Vatican paid about $225 million to acquire a share of that property. In 2018, it bought the rest. An Italian financier involved in all that is going on the offensive, refusing to be made the scapegoat. We'll unpack all of that for you. Finally, there is a new book out about the next pope. And so we'll talk about sort of the legitimate, not so much who the next pope is going to be, because who knows, but the legitimacy of the conversation about a new pope while a current pope is still in power. All that and more is coming for you this week. So those are the headlines. Please stick around for the context.
Hey everybody, this is Jared Zimmer, the director of the Word on Fire Institute. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the John Allen Show, yet another production brought to you by the Word on Fire Institute. I wanted to just take a minute of your time to tell you a little bit about what you receive as a member of the Institute. So the Institute exists to be a formation arm of Bishop Barron's apostolate Word on Fire. We offer specialized courses in theology, philosophy, spirituality, practical evangelization, numerous other topics to help form you to be the best evangelist that you can be. Along with those courses, you have a lively forum where you can discuss the courses with the other students as well as the professors. You also get a quarterly journal called Evangelization and Culture. In that journal, we have interviews with folks such as Dave Rubin, Dr. Arthur Brooks. We discuss culture and cinema, you name it. We will bring it to you, again, as another tool to help you learn good evangelization in the modern world. Along with your membership, you also get free access to Word on Fire Digital. We're talking about hundreds of hours of Bishop Barron's content, so his feature films, his study series. You also get a free book, Bishop Barron's latest book called Centered, really diving deep into the spirituality of Word on Fire. So be sure to go to wordonfire.institute to learn more, and we'd love to see you inside.
All right, so let us begin with Pope Francis's celebration of the Feast of Sts. Peter and Paul. As I said at the top of the show, Peter and Paul are sort of the Roman saints par excellence. Peter, of course, the first pope, the foundation of the papacy, the rock upon which the church is built. St. Paul, the prototypical missionary and evangelist, the one who showed us how to take the Christian gospel to all the peoples of the earth. Both believed to have been martyred here in Rome in or around the year 67. St. Peter on the Vatican Hill, of course, where St. Peter's Basilica is located. St. Paul out in the Roman neighborhood of Aur, and the story goes that he was beheaded under the Emperor Nero, and that when his head was detached from his body, it bounced 3 times on the ground. Water sprung out of the ground each time, hence that neighborhood is now known as Tre Fontane, or the neighborhood of the 3 fountains, in honor of St. Paul. Now, as I said, normally the Feast of St. Peter and Paul is kind of a pivot for any number of massive events here in Rome. For one thing, normally there is a major fireworks celebration here in the city. That didn't happen this year. Normally, a huge crowd turns out in St. Peter's Square for an open-air mass led by the Pope for the feast. I mean, you're usually talking 100,000, 200,000 people because the weather is usually great on June 29th. And it's sort of often considered the last big event of the summer before the Italians start sliding to what they call Ferragosto, which is the traditional August holiday when everybody leaves town. That did not happen this year. It is also a major ecumenical moment because after the iconic meeting between Pope Paul VI, now St. Paul VI, and Patriarch Athenagoras of Constantinople in 1964, every year the Vatican will send a delegation to the Fanar, that's the headquarters of the Patriarch of Constantinople, on November 30th for the Feast of St. Andrew, their patron saint. And Constantinople will send a delegation to Rome for the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul. This year, however, the Vatican had to write to Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople, in effect disinviting him, not for any unecumenical motive, but simply because restrictions on travel and restrictions on crowds made that inadvisable. So there's an important chunk of this traditional annual celebration that is missing. Finally, it is also typically the time when the Catholic Church takes up the Peter's Pence collection around the world. That's normally collected in churches on or around June 29th. It is designed, if you read the statutes of Peter Pence, it is designed to support the activities of the Pope. It is often presented as a chance for people around the world to support the charities of the Pope. Now, that has become controversial recently because this London financial scandal that I mentioned at the top, part of what made that so galling to many people is that the money used by the Vatican Secretariat of State to finance this land deal in London actually came from the proceeds of Peter's Pence. A footnote to all of this, when my wife and I went to Mass here in Rome last Sunday, the pastor told us that there would not be a Peter's Pence collection, well, they call it the obolo here, that was not going to be taken up this year on the celebration of Saints Peter and Paul. It's been delayed until October 4th, the Feast of St. Francis. But he still described it as a collection to support the Pope's charities, which raises a kind of truth in labeling question. Vatican officials have insisted that if you read the statutes, it doesn't say charity, it says activities, and that's perfectly true. I've checked that. That's often, however, not how it's marketed. It will be interesting to see when October 4th rolls around if the description of what this collection is intended to support better matches how it's actually deployed at times by its overseers here in the Vatican. All right, that's what's not happening on the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul. Nevertheless, the core of this celebration was still in place. Pope Francis celebrated the Mass for the feast in St. Peter's Basilica in front of a small crowd, roughly 50 people, socially distanced and so on, most of whom were wearing masks. And he still blessed the pallia. Those are the woolen stoles that archbishops wear as the symbols of their office. In the old days, by which I mean like under St. John Paul II, newly appointed archbishops during the past year, they all came to Rome to receive their pallia directly from the Pope. Now it is presented to them in their home basilica by the nuncio, that's the papal ambassador in the country. And so over the course of the next year, presumably, as the coronavirus allows, newly appointed archbishops in the States, for instance, and we've got them in Anchorage, Juneau, Atlanta, Philadelphia, and St. Louis, will be receiving those pallia from the papal ambassador. So the core of the feast was in place, but nevertheless, it was a striking reminder of how far we've come in terms of the exit from the coronavirus, but yet also how far we still have to go. All right, secondly, the unfolding London financial scandal. This was a scandal that began in 2013 when the Vatican Secretariat of State, that's kind of the 800-pound gorilla on the Vatican scene, the department that oversees all the other departments, by far the most powerful, decided that it wanted to buy a piece of property in London. It got into a partnership with an Italian financier by the name of Raffaele Mincione, spent about $225 million. Later, there were tensions in that relationship. The Secretary of State decided it wanted to buy its way out of that deal, and so in 2018, it spent roughly another 100 million or so euro, about $125, $130 million, to buy out all of Mincione's shares so that it became the 100% outright owner of that property. Now, in order to finance that deal, the Secretary of State had asked for a loan from the Vatican Bank. At that stage, the board of the Vatican Bank saw this transaction as suspicious under the Vatican's new transparency, anti-money laundering laws, and reported it to Vatican investigators, the Vatican's judicial system, which is open in investigation. So far, 7 people in the Vatican have lost their jobs related to this scandal, and 4 are under investigation, facing possible criminal charges from the Vatican. They include Mincione, another Italian financier who arranged the second part of the transaction, a guy by the name of Gianluigi Torzi, and 2 officials of the Secretariat of State, a layman by the name of Fabrizio Tirabassi and a Monsignor by the name of Alberto Perlasca. Now, Mincione, knowing that he is possibly facing an indictment in the Vatican, reportedly has decided he's not going to wait around to be made the scapegoat for this deal. He's going on the offense. According to reports in the Italian press, Mincione has decided to launch 2 civil lawsuits against the Secretary of State in front of the High Court of Justice in the UK, essentially charging them with defamation, claiming he did absolutely nothing wrong, and suggesting that they have smeared him by making him publicly the object of speculation about possible criminal wrongdoing, possible misappropriation and extortion. Now, these lawsuits, we don't know what is going to happen with them, but it is nevertheless interesting that you may have this fall 2 parallel legal processes related to this London financial scandal, one unfolding in the Vatican, the other unfolding in a civil court in the UK. All of this, of course, comes at a time when the Vatican is trying to turn a corner in terms of its financial reform efforts. Pope Francis recently decreed a new law on procurement, that is, on contracts in the Vatican, that has been widely hailed, including by me, as a very serious step forward. In effect, it attempts to eliminate the problems of nepotism and feudalism that have long plagued the Vatican's financial operation. That is, it tries to eliminate conflicts of interest by creating a pool of people who will oversee competitive bids for contracts, and nobody can serve in that pool who has a conflict of interest on a particular bid. It also attacks feudalism by centralizing the whole contracting process in an effort to achieve economies of scale and therefore significant savings. We had a briefing with a couple of finance lawyers here in Italy this week who have no connection to the Vatican, who had taken a look at this law and said this is a common sense law that, if it works as designed, should eliminate corruption and should achieve significant savings. Now, all this is important because the Vatican is coming up for another round of review by Moneyval. That's the Council of Europe's anti-money laundering agency. They want to have a clean bill of health, and being dogged by this London scandal obviously does not help. Will be interesting to see whether the Vatican decides to strike a deal with Mincione. Mincione, by the way, last month offered to pay back everything the Vatican had spent on that London piece of property and buy it back from them, claiming it is still a great investment. The Vatican refused. It'll be interesting to see whether they revisit that decision. Finally, the next pope. A colleague and friend of ours here in Rome, Edward Penton, who writes for the National Catholic Register, is publishing a new book called The Next Pope. It is slated to be published August 4th by Sophia Press in the States and the UK, and then in translation elsewhere. Edward outlines 19 guys, 19 cardinals he thinks are candidates to be the next pope, and gives you some background and history on who these 19 men are. Now, to be honest with you, Edward is a fairly conservative guy. The outlet he writes for, the Register, is a fairly conservative outlet. The book reflects a basically pretty conservative point of view on the state of the church. And so if that's not your cup of tea, you may not like the analytical filter. But I promise you, regardless of what you think of the conclusions, the data Edward provides, that is, the information he provides about these 19 cardinals, is highly useful in understanding who they are now and what they might bring to the office should they be elected pope. Now, to be honest, I find most of Edward's candidates pretty plausible, a few debatable, borderline, a couple, frankly, preposterous. But that's a conversation for another day, because what I want to close with here on this show is the question of whether it's even appropriate in the first place to be talking about the next pope while the current one is still in power, because a lot of people find that distasteful, maybe disloyal, maybe even a political attack on the current pope, an effort to weaken him. I am here to tell you that is just ridiculous for 3 reasons. One, the direction of the Catholic Church matters. Nobody has more influence on that direction than a pope. Therefore, who the next pope might be is a monumentally important question for the Church. And the last thing you want is for the men who are going to make that choice, that is the College of Cardinals, those who are under the age of 80, to be ill-informed when they have to sit down and do that. So providing them with information, reliable, well-researched, responsible information, is a service to the most important choice those cardinals will ever make. Now, secondly, we all know that there is going to be a new pope at some point. Pope Francis is the 266th pope in the line of the Catholic Church. There will be a 267th. We don't know when that choice is going to come. And if you wait for the pope to either be fatally ill or to have resigned, it will be far too late to have done the kind of meticulous research necessary to provide information that will actually be helpful. And so not only is there nothing wrong with a journalist or a researcher or an academic or someone else doing that right now, it is actually vitally important that it be done now. Now, finally, some people say, well, it is silly to talk about the next pope because, of course, a conclave, that is, a papal election, unfolds under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is perpetually capable of surprise. Well, of course that is true, but, if the possibility of surprise were to stop us from thinking about the future at all, then there would be no economic projections. There would be no crop forecasts. For that matter, there would be no weather reports. As General, later President Dwight Eisenhower famously said, I have always found battle plans completely useless, but I have found the process of planning indispensable. And it's the same here. The better prepared we are when this crossroads moment comes, the better able we will be to adapt when surprise happens. And finally, in terms of the role of the Holy Spirit, look, folks, here's the truth. Catholic theology is not, I repeat this, is not that the Holy Spirit descends from heaven and picks the next pope entirely on its own. No. Catholic theology is that grace perfects nature, it does not remove it. That is to say, the Holy Spirit guides the cardinals in the conclave, but they still have to draw upon their very human judgment, which means the normal laws of institutional sociology and political science apply to a conclave as much as they do any other walk of life. And thinking this is exclusively a spiritual undertaking where no homework is required because the Holy Spirit is going to do all the heavy lifting is, quite frankly, a prescription for disaster. So, I am not telling you who the next pope is going to be. That is a conversation for another day. But I am telling you, if you're wondering, you're not doing anything wrong. All right, that is the John Allen Show for this week. Thanks for spending part of your week with us. We will be here 2 weeks from now, same bat place, same bat channel. In the meantime, do be checking out our full coverage of all the church news on Crux. Again, that is cruxnow.com. cruxnow.com. Also, be checking out the Word on Fire Institute. That is wordonfire.institute, wordonfire.institute. Until we see one another again, stay safe, stay healthy, have a blessed fortnight, and once again, Maria Salus Populi Romani, ora pro nobis. God bless.